You are one of the elite CMOs in cybersecurity. Do you still think yourself as a category creator first and a CMO second?
I think I would have had a different answer for this 7 or 8 years ago than I do today.
What is the process to create a category?
The category is really the center of what brings together the company strategy, product strategy, and the market strategy, and the marketing strategy. If you have the marketing strategy around a category, but you don't have the product strategy to follow suit, then it becomes a marketing campaign. If you go back to our S1 of our IPO back in 2018, the first sentence of the business section said something to the effect of, we are defining an emerging category called cyber exposure. There was a conversation about, well, let's just call it what Gartner's calling it. If we call it what Gartner's calling it, we're already anchored into Gartner's definition of it. And we might not even be the leader.
Who is responsible for creating categories, the vendors or the analysts?
This is an answer where the benefit of time has shifted my answer now that I've actually seen how the movie's played out.
Let's switch to the topic that is near and dear to both our hearts, which is exposure management.
I love hearing this from your perspective because I had no idea that anyone outside of the executive team even knew I was working on anything. It wasn't just me going in and into a dark room and coming out with this brilliance. And I said, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all 10 questions. I worked very, very closely with Renault on teasing out the entire story and the vision.
And JJ, one of the measures of success would be, does the category outlive you? You and your time at Tenable.
I remember when Gartner published their first report on exposure management, and I must have had 50 text messages and emails from people at Tenable going, oh my gosh, it's Gartner finally adopted it. What a moment.
What's the future of exposure management from the creator of exposure management? Do you think the future is very much human-centered products where the humans are using the products, or whether the agents are actually doing the work and then the customers are essentially buying outcomes? What's the role of marketing in the age of AI? How is that role changing?
I think every marketing team should have people in their team that can help build the technology, maybe forward deployed marketing engineers in marketing.
Are you then also hiring more people?
I think there's certain roles where, and until an agent can plan an event.
Are you cloud filled yet? So
Yeah.
how, JJ, last question for the day. What's the next big category that you're creating?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jennifer Johnson, or as most people know her, JJ, Chief Marketing Officer at Crowdstrike.
JJ, it is so nice to have you on the Noise to Signal podcast. You are one of the elite CMOs in cybersecurity. You were, if I remember correctly, you were the CMO at Tanium, and then you were CMO at Tenable. You did a bunch of non-security companies, and then you came back and became the CMO at Crowdstrike, one of the premier organizations for cybersecurity. And I came to know about you just around the time you were joining Tenable. I had not known much about you. And my recollection of my time at Tanible was I always saw you as a category creator. You're somebody who creates categories, defines categories, and then goes from there. So my first question to you, JJ, do you still think yourself as a category creator first and a CMO second, or are you a CMO first and a category creator second? What's your thinking on?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to see you again. I think I would have had a different answer for this 7 or 8 years ago than I do today. So, well, first and foremost, I've been a CMO, right, for now almost 15 years. The role that I played at Tenable, and I know we're going to go into that a little bit more. I mean, I was already a CMO, but the role that I was really, the mission, so to speak, of joining was to really help Tenable build a superset category on, using their vulnerability management core as the foundation for building a bigger category that then we could, both reposition the company for larger growth, expand to the platform, go public. So my charter there was very much a category creation charter. So if I was answering this question back at Tenable, I probably would have said, I am the CMO, but I'm a category creator. Now, here we go, fast forward almost 10 years. And I'm really excited to talk about this story because it's like very rare when you can actually have a 10-year horizon in which you can actually talk about what happened and then look almost 10 years later and the story unfolds. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. But I think if I were to answer it today, I'm definitely a CMO and first. And I say that because, I've built my whole career, for the last 15 years, I've built my career around being, a CMO. And I did leave cyber for a period of time and I came back and I made a decision. I want to be the best CMO I can in the best brand in cybersecurity possible. And so I'm really fortunate that I actually made it there to CrowdStrike, which checks that box. And so I am a CMO first. And I think that you can use the skills of category creation to help drive your marketing strategy. Like having a point of view, positioning, how do you build market awareness? How do you work with the analyst community? How do you drive growth? I mean, everything is in the spirit of course, driving growth and building market share and leadership. So I think a lot of the principles apply. But I'm a CMO.
Awesome. I recognize that you're a CMO first and a category creator second now. But when you came on and you were very big on this category creation play, and this word was so foreign to me. What is she talking about? Like, what is this category? We are a vulnerability management player. Like, what other categories are there? I'm curious, like somebody like you who has been a lead CMO in cybersecurity, what is the process to create a category?
Yeah. So let me ask you, I'm going to answer that, but I want to ask you a question. Were you skeptical? Right? Because you came from
I
you're
believe
a
it.
technical background. You were an engineer, right? At Tenable?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So what was when someone said, oh, JJ's coming, we're going to build a category, like was your initial,
My initial impression, well, this is another marketing campaign because the marketing people come and go all the time, and this is something that I've seen in many organizations. It's one of the most fragile jobs in the industry, right? Yeah, especially in my previous job, some marketing people come in a year or two and they're out, but then but this word was never spoken of. Category creation was never spoken of. It was always spoken in the context of a campaign. We are going to launch a new campaign. We are going to do X. We are going to do Y. And so my mental model was this is another new campaign. This is a new campaign from a marketing perspective. So I didn't completely understand the category creation at that time. But in the fullness of time, I've realized what that really means because I guess one of your lasting legacies is the category still exists and the company still exists and the company is still an exposure management company, which is like completely redefined. And I've come to appreciate what real category creation means compared to a marketing campaign. I don't know
yeah,
if I answered the question, but
yeah,
like that's my like 2 minute summary of what I thought of what it was, because it was very confusing. It was almost like, from my perspective, it was almost like an identity crisis. Here's a new person that comes in. Hey guys, thank you for your service, but we are an exposure management company from now on. And like, what is she talking about? We have a VM company.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so yeah.
So thank you for that. So the first thing I'll say is, there's a book called Play Bigger, and Play Bigger also, they were a group of people that wrote a book on category creation called Play Bigger. And if you haven't read it, please read it. It's now, 10 plus years old, but it's a good read. And the people who wrote the book also had an advisory, and I got to work with them and do some category creation with them between Tanium and Tenable. So when I went into Tenable, I had this, I kind of went through the category design, crash course, right? Like, immersive experience, right? And one of the concepts in Playburger in the book and is around this concept of a magic triangle. And a category is really the center of what brings together the company strategy, the product strategy, and the market strategy and the marketing strategy. And what I'd say is you have to have all three of those, right? And so what do I mean by that? Like if you have the marketing strategy around a category, but you don't have the product strategy to follow suit, then it becomes a marketing campaign because all it is a message and a story, right?
Yes.
And so, but if you think about so a product strategy without the corresponding marketing strategy is a roadmap, right? And so if you take these things that seem like, functional exercises, but you put them together, right? Like category creation, first and foremost, is it's about creating and defining a new container in which you live, where you are the best and only option, right? And the answer to this problem. And it all starts with the problem. Now, in Tenable's case, Tenable was the founder of a creator of Nessus, which in the vulnerability management world was the kind of the first vulnerability scanner, if you will. Probably one of the most ubiquitous tools deployed. It was, I think, the number 3 most ubiquitous security tools deployed when I was at
Mm,
Tenable.
yeah.
And that kind of evolved from scanning and vulnerability assessment to vulnerability management. But Tenable was still, for the most part, a single product company. Now they were moving to a platform, but it was still a single product company in a single market, which had a nice TAM, total addressable market, but it was about billion and a half, right, at the time for VM. And, there was, fierce competition, right? It was Qualys, it was Rapid7, it was Tenable. The 3 are still out
Yeah.
there.
Right.
Um, and the company had, wanted to kind of push through like decent growth rates in VM, right? Growing, it was probably a low to mid double-digit grower, right? Not 20%, I don't even think back then. So, how do we accelerate the growth rate of the company? How do we continue to drive a bigger narrative and category, which is going to help us expand our total addressable market? The company was going from a single product to a platform. Well, that's a very natural fit for category creation because now all of a sudden you have multiple products. Well, how do they all come together and under this kind of this broader platform story that allows you to tell a bigger story, solve a bigger problem, address a bigger TAM, but it also helps you navigate what you're going to build, right? And so that's kind of the key point here from the product and the market category coming together. The category is about what is the problem that we see that in the market that needs to be solved? And then if we frame the problem the right way, how are we the best and only answer to solve it? And for Tenable, it was like going from a very technical compliance driven conversation with VM, right? Where am I missing patches? Where do I have a misconfiguration, to a risk conversation? Where am I exposed? And where am I exposed across my entire attack surface? And then how do I quantify that risk so we can actually do something about it and address it as business risk? And that's a very different conversation. And so then you start to think about, well, Tenable only had one small piece of what they even have today, right? And so it actually helps drive your product strategy, right? They didn't have all the answers, they didn't have all the capabilities, but it helped actually create a container which you could grow into.
Fascinating. The question I have in mind is when you're doing this process, do you then also invent new words to define the categories? For example, the example I have in mind is when Netflix was coming up, they were calling the common word for what Netflix was doing was digital rentals, and they said no, we are doing streaming. So they just said we are not digital rentals, we are streaming company. So when you go through this category creation process, do you also envision, because I remember you completely sidelined the VM and the compliance, and it was more on the exposure. You were not even talking about risk. There was a new taxonomy of words to use. So I'm curious, is that also part of the plan, that you define, position, use different words that keep people are not familiar with, regardless of whether it is tenable or not? But is that part of the thinking as part of the category creation?
Yeah, I mean, the problem, the kind of the from to, we were moving from a point in
Excellent.
time compliance audit conversation to a continuous risk conversation where cyber risk is business risk. So if you kind of use that as the framing, well, then you can kind of look at, is vulnerability management, that's always going to be the core, but is that really the category? Is that honoring the new problem that we're solving? And the answer was no, because number one, vulnerability management was already a very well-defined, well-established category. There is an anchor, sometimes you have to change the words because people anchor you in something, right?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of one impetus for it. But the other was, if you're talking about risk, vulnerability is a good word, but we were thinking, what is another word that really captures from a business perspective what it is that we're trying to drive here? And the word exposure kind of came out of that discussion. The word exposure was teased out of it. Now we had this debate whether, what we wound up Like if you go back to our S1 of our IPO back in 2018, the first sentence of the business section said something to the effect of, we are defining an emerging category called cyber exposure. Now, there was also like a debate. Do we call it cyber exposure? Do we call it cyber exposure management? I mean, my point of view is it's a life cycle. It's a process. It's not a thing. So we should call it cyber exposure management. But we decided also we should keep cyber in front because we want people to understand that it's about cyber exposure, cyber risk. I actually didn't win that debate. So we went with cyber exposure, and ultimately Gartner, which I think Gartner did the right thing, which was actually drop the cyber and add it and add management on it on the back end of it.
So
But
they added
the
threat.
words matter.
They
Yeah.
added threat. They added threat.
Well, it's exposure management, and now they're combining it with threat. So it's like so there's exposure management, and then there's CTEM, which is continuous threat and exposure management. That's actually also an interesting point because at the time there was VM, vulnerability management, and Gartner had defined this emerging category at the time called TVM, threat and vulnerability management, right?
Yeah.
Which then there was also vulnerability risk management. That's what Forrester's version of it was. But there was a conversation about, well, let's just call it what Gartner's calling it. When I said, if we call it what Gartner's calling it, we're already anchored into Gartner's definition of it. And we might not even be the leader. So let's shift it.
Hold your thought there, JJ. So my question to you is, who is responsible for creating categories, the vendors or the analysts? This is like an eternal conflict because, if you do what you did, then you become a category of one.
Yes.
And you don't get any traction, it quickly fizzles.
Yes.
If it doesn't get any traction, it fizzles out into a marketing campaign.
Yes.
Right? You are the only vendor. You are self-promoting yourself as we are X. And then the world is like, we don't know what X is, but we like Y. And Y is a very true and tested path. So my first, I guess my question is, who is, in your humble opinion, who's responsible for creating categories? Is it the vendors or is it the Gartners and the Forresters of the world?
So this is an answer where the benefit of time has shifted my answer now that I've actually seen how the movie's played out, right? Gartner, I'll take you back though. Like I was listening to the head of research at Gartner talk back in like 2014, and he had this slide and I'll never forget it. And it was why your category isn't. I will never forget this slide. And it was like, to your exact point, all these vendors, the analyst point of view is all these vendors want this new category and they're the only ones in the category. Well, people don't buy categories on a market of one vendor. Gartner's perspective is our job is to create categories based on where we're seeing the market heading and there's critical mass. And so, my point of view back when I was creating with Tenable, creating exposure management is Gartner's only looking in the rearview mirror on this because they're only going to create a category when there's already like critical mass and established players. If you really want to chart the definition of something new, you need to be the first ones out there, and so only the vendors can do it. Now, I've shifted my perspective on that because, look, at the end of the day, when exposure management really became a thing, that now in cybersecurity, like every vendor that's in this space is using exposure management, including CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
That only really happened though because of Gartner. Like Tenable can't take credit for that because if it was just Tenable and they would have continued just on that path, maybe Qualys or Rapid7 or a VM startup would have picked it up, but it wouldn't have had the critical mass that I think it has now. And I think that really became, that really happened. That inflection point was because of the analyst firms picking it up and taking it and making it a thing, right? And so, you need the analysts to actually, build the category. You need the analysts. And, some would say that Gartner's not going to just take something that a vendor does and just rinse and repeat it. They're going to put their own spin on it. Maybe they're going to change some of the words, like even Forrester called it VRM, vulnerability risk management, right? So that's fine. But the whole point is, if it's your point of view and your story and your criteria, which in the case of Gartner, it was a lot of like almost verbatim what Tenable's point of view was on it. Like that's really when the category went mainstream. So you do need the analysts.
So I guess what you're saying is you seed your thoughts with the analysts so that they start to appreciate, and if they acknowledge your point of view, they talk to a bunch of their customers, and then there is like a critical mass which is created, and then they're like, okay, fine, this looks like a category, let's call it a category, and then go from there. So given all the category creation discussion that is happening, let's switch to the topic that is near and dear to both our hearts, which is exposure management. So let me set the stage. I mean, we already discussed this, but I want to share the creation of exposure management category from my perspective, because Tenable is attributed as the company that is the creator, or at least a creator of exposure management category. But I saw it firsthand that you actually, behind the scenes, it was essentially, JJ creating the category. And I'll give you my perspective how I saw it. I was heading the research team at Tenable. And I remember this is all pre-IPO. We are getting ready for the IPO, and you come in, and the information we had about you, hey, this is a new flamboyant CMO. She was the CMO at Tanium, and your pitch was, hey, 2-second visibility or something on those lines. So you basically crafted this narrative for Tanium that, hey, we give you 2-second visibility. What do you have? And then, none of your competitors had any answer, because if they came back with 1 second, it sounded like, you're just copying our message, right? So you were brought on into Tenable as the new CMO, and there was a lot of hush hush. Hey, JJ is doing something. JJ is doing something. JJ is building. She's positioning, marketing, whatever it is, and we had no clue. We had no clue what is happening. And before exposure management category existed, there were all these different terms to describe what we were. We were VM company, a unified vulnerability management company, a risk-based vulnerability management company, a threat and vulnerability management company. And there are some discussions about merging this into the SOAR category, and all these fractional things that were happening. No one really knew what was happening. And then you went into this deep dive, right? Almost like you went into some, like a 2-week, at least that's how that's how I saw it. You went into this 2-week deep dive with your team, and then you come out and you do this all hands presentation. I was sitting in the front row, and and this is where the big unveil. This is the big unveil that is happening, and you go through all the problems. And the reason I remember this so vividly is because it was also a very sensory experience. And I don't know if you planned this way, or maybe it just, it happened that way, but it was very sensory in the sense that when you were describing the problems, all the slides were black. All slides were black, and then the text was white. And then when you went to the solutioning aspect, the slides went white and the text was black. And there was a moment in the presentation when the lights came on when you went into solutioning. Right, so we were in a dark room. All the slides were dark, and then suddenly, when we get into the solutioning, the lights come on, as if there is like the dawn of a new era, right? And for me, whoa, what just happened here? This is new. This is not what we are used to, because most CMOs that came in before you, they had the slide, they had the marketing campaign, they had all these different things that were happening, and colors and images and color palette and typography and blah blah blah. But not this, right? And so you did, and you come in, you unveil, and then you said, hey guys, thank you for your service, but we are no longer a VM company, we are a cyber exposure company, or something along those lines. And that was the birth. And in my view, that is the birth of the exposure management category that existed. Mm-hmm. Now, the question I have for you, JJ, this is probably the most difficult thing to do for a new person to do, and basically tell the founders, this is what we are. Because the founders have built the company, they build the reputation, they build the product, they have a point of view on everything. And here's a new person that comes in. This is what I think it should be. And like, this person is like 2 weeks old. What does she know about our business? Kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Like, so there is a lot of tension that happens behind the scenes because you're new. Yeah, I mean, granted you're a CMO, but you still have to work with the founders. So my first question is, what was that process like? Because I'm sure it was not as easy as it sounded like. You probably had a lot of starts and stops going back and forth, because I didn't know it. It was like, for us, we just saw it when you unveiled it. We never part of this thing, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's where I want to start. So it's a big monologue, but I wanted to start there so that the listeners have context of what was happening.
Yeah.
Tenable. So
So,
give you the floor
and
now.
I love hearing this from your perspective because I had no idea that anyone outside of the executive team even knew I was working on anything. So it's so funny to hear it from your perspective. And I'll get to the unveil, but it was all very intentional. So I'm glad that it had its desired impacts. We'll talk through that. But the first thing I'd say is, the the person who is I'm going to say it's the facilitator of the category creation for a reason, because it wasn't just me going in and into a dark room and coming out with this brilliance, right? The art of category design is actually the answer is always in the room, right? And I think with anything in marketing, especially with this, is you have to ask the right questions to tease out the right answers, but you need to know when you hear it. And then you need to kind of take that and run with it. And so the first thing I did is it was Amit Uran, the CEO and the team. And I said, we're going to go through a process, because I think everyone in the executive team is like, okay, we know what you do and why you're here, but how are we getting from here to there? So I walked through the whole process and I said, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all 10 questions. And you can't share your work. You have to answer those 10 questions and give it back to me. And I'm going to synthesize the answers. And then we're all going to get together and you'll understand why I'm doing this. So the questions were really teasing out, what do you think the problem is that we're solving? Has the problem shifted since the first problem when the company was founded on a problem? Has that problem shifted? And then what do you think the answer is? I just asked the question. And I got back, some things were the same, but in some of cases, I got 10 variations on the answer. So I got everyone together in a room and I showed them the results. And I said, look, part of this is we have to be aligned in this room with who we are and what category we're solving and the strategy, because if we're not all aligned, this thing is not going to succeed. But I said, I also want to show it because it's not that this room isn't aligned. It's just everyone has a slightly different perspective. And so when I showed people the differences in the answers, everyone was like, it was like a light bulb moment. And then I said, okay, let's take this. We debated, we went through and we debated them and through that conversation teased out, what do we think the problem is that we're solving? And so once I had that, then it's like, okay, now I'm going to go and we're going to work to the solution. Now, in the room, every voice mattered, but in the room, there were certain voices that I'm not going to say mattered more than others, but held a little bit more weight. Now, I think one of the advantages of when you're doing category creation is when you have one of the founders or the founders in the room, is usually that's where the answer sits and lies. Because in this case, it was, Renaud and Jack were, still in the company. Renaud in particular, who was the inventor of Nessus and the CTO, he knew exactly where we needed to go. He had the vision. He needed somebody to help him articulate it and put it into a coherent story. And so I worked very, very closely with Renaud on teasing out the entire story and the vision, coming from this point of, I know the problem we started the company around, that problem is now shifted and magnified, and we have to kind of solve it in a different way. And so Renaud was really my partner, my partner in this category creation journey. But, Amit, as the CEO, who wasn't the founder, who had just come in a little bit before me as CEO, obviously he needed to be behind it, because if he didn't, this is a story that our company's rallying around, but this is also a story that we're going to be going public around. So if he's not rallied behind it, it's not going to land. So Amit, while he didn't create VM, he obviously, if you know anything about Amit's background, he had an extraordinary background in cybersecurity. So he had a lot of depth. And I worked with him to really get his input in. And I kind of went around the table and I kind of sat with everyone and teased out their piece. And Amit told me, the one thing he always said to me is that he said, I ran such a masterful process because I got everyone aligned and everyone felt like they could see their input into it. So it wasn't like there was something being forced on the team. It was like everyone's input, everyone could see their impact in it and therefore could get behind it. And So I say that because the process of getting to the answer is not about the CMO or whoever's driving the process having all the answers. In fact, I don't think that's usually how it works. It's about bringing everybody along, and it's executive alignment actually is what it is, because that's part of the reason that category endured is because everybody got around it, including Amit, and planted the flag, not just me. That would have been a marketing campaign. If it was just me planting the flag, then it would have, it would probably lived 6 to 9 months, and then it would have just died on the vine.
The question I have is, when you were planting the flag, in your mind, were you always thinking this is a new category, I'm going to create a new category, or were you just thinking, hey, I just need a new framing for this company?
No, it was a new category. It was a new category, which was
So,
going to create a new framing for the company. And it was going to create a container that would drive our company strategy, our product strategy, our M&A strategy, our marketing strategy. Like, I knew what my objective was, and I was not confused. This was not a marketing campaign initiative.
So, it's clear that you are not confused, but it's clear to see that how the sales team could be confused, because the
Yes.
sales team has been selling this for 15 years
Yeah.
before you came on board.
Yeah.
You come to the sales team, you give them a new slide deck, you give them everything. Hey, go tell your customers you're not a VM company, you're an exposure management company, you're a cyber exposure company. Was there any friction from the sales side? Because that's where, I've seen this personally. The salespeople get very used to their way of pitching, and like you said, if I, like, in my previous roles, when I listened to the pitches from 15 salespeople, the 15 sales pitches were completely different. Like, regardless how much certification you do in terms of sales training, everyone pitches the company that they want it, right? So here you're, hey, we are repositioning, reframing, new category. So
Yeah.
was there any, because I believe that would be the biggest pushback was from the sales team, or are they just
Yeah.
bought into the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, if there's gonna, I don't want to say a skeptic, but if there's gonna be somebody in the room, it many times is sales, and I understand why, right? And the friction point here is, if you're unveiling a category vision, by definition, it should be bigger than what you have today, because it's something you grow into. It provides a rationale behind the decisions you make from that point forward, right? What you put in the product, new products you introduce, companies you might acquire, and sales needs to sell what's on the truck, right? That's how they're going to get to their number. They live in a 90-day time
Window.
horizon, where
Yeah.
category creation is in a multi-year time horizon, and
Yeah.
reconciling those things is difficult. And so I think there was a little bit of friction of, like, we are a VM company, we're selling VM, like, why do we need to go do this? But I will tell you, there were three things that kind of overcame that friction. Number one is, I made a very strong point to unveil it the way that I did, with kind of some drama associated with it. You talked about, and like, but I wanted the whole team to, like, get excited and rally around it, because it's momentum and inertia, right? If the whole company's around it, like, it's easier for everybody to get on board. Number two is, we were going public, and, like, that's a prime use case for doing this, because it's helping to articulate a bigger story and a bigger TAM. But it was also that was the message that we put out to the world. So, sales can go off and talk about something totally different, but, like, we just went public on this topic and in this story, right? So, like, they kind of have to get on board with it. And the third was Amit. I will tell you, like, Amit was very, such a great advocate, but he was very clear with the company, like, this is who we are. This is our story. This is what we're selling. Get on board. And he was not apologetic about that. And so, I think those were the keys to success.
So, one thing you talk about, JJ, is obviously you got the alignment from the exec team. Were you also talking to the customers and, like, like, testing water so that you can bring that feedback back to the sales team? You talk to the customers, this is resonating, this is not resonating. Was
Yeah.
that part of the equation? Because,
Yeah.
if you don't give that to the sales team, they're like, who did you talk to?
Right. No, great point. So we did talk to some customers as part of the vetting process, that were on our customer advisory board, more of our forward-leaning customers that, I worked with Renault, and we kind of handpicked them. Now, you could say, well, you're handpicking the ones that are, visionaries that are going to align. But it was more of, well, no, I mean, it's kind of that old saying, like, if you would have asked someone if they wanted, they would have said, they would have said they wanted a faster horse, not a car, right?
Yeah,
It's
you
kind
need
of
a
the same
code.
thing. is
Yeah.
you have to understand the what you're hearing, but they might not always know what the answer is, right? Or you might show them an answer that they never even, you know, thought of, or even articulate the problem in a way that they didn't know they had, right? Um, and like the iPhone is a classic example of articulating a problem. No one was asking for an iPhone, right? They didn't
No
know
one.
they had the problem, right? I think in
Yeah.
this case, it was just listening to the customers of where we needed to go. And they might not have known what the answer was, but they were very good at articulating what the problem was. And so we did do some validation with that. And we validated the story with Gartner as well. Like, they can agree, they could, agree or disagree with the naming, which obviously we know what happened there, but the story and the strategy they were on board with.
So JJ, you touched upon one thing that is super important is, this was all in the lead up to the IPO. This was all done in the lead up to the IPO. And then, the thing that the product strategy, the marketing strategy, the corporate strategy, all of this needs to come together because before the exposure management category, we were like a single product. I mean, I had multiple products, but the prominent product was Nessus. But then the thing that I took away post creation of the categories, all the acquisitions were also very centered around this strategy. Because we didn't have a really good operational technology piece of software, so then we went and bought like an OT player, and then they went and bought some other players. They're just so you helped paint this big vision, which was not clear at that time, and there are a lot of holes and gaps in the story. But then that helped Tenable kind of fill in the gaps after. The thing was made. Was it something that you were intentional in when you were pitching the story that we go out right here as is now, right now, but then we fill in the story later on?
Yeah. I mean, because part of the story was, look, you have this attack surface and you have to be able to, have the breadth. We had like a breadth message is you have to be able to understand your risk across your entire attack surface. By definition, that was one part of the story. So by definition, you have to cover the whole attack surface, right? And so we had, there was IT, there was cloud, there was IoT and OT. Well, we didn't actually have technology that covered the OT side of things, right? And so that's a prime example of category strategy driving product and M&A strategy. So let's go fill out the portfolio,
And
right?
it also helped you, I guess, in some ways, increase the TAM before going IPO because you were now still a bigger picture. VM is part of our use cases, but then we're going after the bigger
That's right.
category, which
That's
is
right.
exposure management.
That's right.
Right?
It's the culmination of, traditional VM plus cloud, like CSPM was just kind of becoming a thing. That's one of the other things that Tenable and most companies now have that are in this space have in their portfolio, IT and OT. And then you think about all of the devices that have to get managed and all of the, the products that are out there. And all of a sudden your TAM starts to expand, right? When you all of a sudden have like all of these, endpoints, all of these cloud workloads, all of these devices that have to be protected and you have to build exposure around them. And then it's the other piece of that is how do you provide the depth of analytics so that you're translating something that's technical to risk, right? How do you prioritize what needs to be fixed? How do you bring in the threat and the asset data and to actually correlate all of that? How do you quantify risk? Like there's a whole host of TAM on that side, right? And one of the other reasons we didn't wind up using the word risk, I think now that I'm going back to this, in our naming is because we didn't want to be conflated with like GRC platforms, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the
Yeah.
other thing. You have to look at what else is around you in adjacent markets. Like we didn't want to be an RSA, Archer, right? I think it was Archer, right? Or it is Archer,
It is
like the
RC, yeah.
GRC platform, right? And so, that was another consideration. So you don't want to get confused. Like you have to build a category and a container, but you don't want to be confused with other things. People are always going to try to put you. I mean, that's human nature. And like the way brains and the mind works is to put people in or things in categories. Because that's how your
Yeah.
brain processes information.
Yeah, it's pattern matching. What is this? When you see something new, what is this? Is this a
That's
dog
right.
or is this a cat or is it a cow?
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's like very primal thinking. And JJ, one of the measures of success would be, does the category outlive you? You and your time at Tenable. And if you look back, uh, the company is still an exposure management company. I mean, it is and you started as a category of one, and I think Tenable is still ranked the best exposure management company. And I guess one of the dreams or one of the best outcomes you could have is become the category king. Right? You don't want to just create the category, you want to be the king of that category. And in some respects, Tenable is still the king of the category it created. And I realize you are saying, hey, I was more like a facilitator. I didn't create the category, but like if you just join the pieces, if you just listen to what you've described, it looks like that was one of the most lasting impacts. A CMO or somebody who's in the marketing profession is probably the greatest highlight. I'm curious, when you started, it was obviously a category of one, but did you ever then go back to RSA and then see the explosion? Because if you go to RSA now, it's all about exposure management. I don't know. Now it is that case, but a year or 2 years later, did you see any changes in the way companies were positioning themselves post the big reveal?
Well, yeah. In fact, after I had left Tenable, I remember when Gartner published their first report. I don't know if it was a market guide or whatever it was on exposure management, and like I must have had 50 text messages and emails from people at Tenable going, "Oh my gosh, it's Gartner finally adopted it. What a moment." And that was a really, I think I was actually not even working in cybersecurity at the time. And so that was a pretty cool moment for me. And then when I came back to cybersecurity, I remember the first RSA that I went to when I came back to a cyber company, it was plastered everywhere. Like, even being gone for a few years and coming back, like that made all the difference. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I can't, it was on the walls, on the booths, everywhere. I mean, now it's just, everyone,
Now it is.
Yeah, it's nomenclature now. So,
as the creator of this category, what do you think is the future of this category? What's the future of exposure management from the creator of exposure management?
yeah, I mean, I think, if you think, I think there's two things. I think even if you look at where Gartner's taking it now, CTEM has been around for a decent period of time, but it's how do you bring threat and exposure together? I think cloud and exposure is a natural point. So I think it's about not exposure management in isolation, but it's how do you kind of bring different pieces of your portfolio together and different context signals together to actually help. Like the core premise of exposure management is still there, right? Understanding and reducing your risk and your vulnerabilities, but how you get there in this world of more complexity, I think, is going to bring more market convergence. So bringing different markets together to make exposure management, even creating a superset over exposure management. I think the other piece of this is AI, frontier AI. Look at with Anthropic bringing out Mythos, right? And now the vulnerability to exploit window, like that's completely shrunk and collapsed. And so what do you need? You need a way to be able to find and prioritize and fix these vulnerabilities fast, because the 0 day is going to be the norm now,
It's 0
right?
hour.
And
It
it's
would
going to be a
probably be
lot.
a zero.
Right. And
Yeah.
the volume is going to explode. And so I think it creates an urgency around why you need it. So that's another, I guess a tailwind for the category.
So let's talk about a new category that is coming up. You mentioned AI.
Mm.
Now everywhere and everywhere you go, it's all about agentic AI and agents doing the work. For a category creator like you, do you see this as a new category, or is this a feature within the category? Because the way I think, when I listen to all the noise that is out there, right? Jobs are going to get replaced, or 50% of the jobs are going to get replaced, and whatnot. And when I think about this sounds more like the accountants, you have to differentiate between tasks and the jobs. So if you look at like the accountants in 1950s, they still did the work, but they used papers and pencils to do the work. Now they use Excel and Claude with Excel, but the job still is there. The accountant as a job is still there. They're probably using different tools. So my question is in this new world, which is agentic, if we were to put the category creator lens on this, do you see this evolving? Imagine this like 2016, 2017, your time at Tenable, you're brought in, you need a new CMO. Is this like a new category or a feature within the existing category? The
Yeah, I mean,
agentic aspect of it.
I think about it like well, first of all, everybody's using AI and like that, like just there's AI washing as we know everywhere. They're just throwing agentic,
That you could see this
everywhere.
as gold. You can see this as a gold mine for a marketer because then this is the time you have to differentiate, because if
Well,
everyone is AI,
it is. It's creating a lot of noise, right? And so, I think that AI will look every technology shift creates a change in the way that work is done, the way you need to address a problem. So I think AI will be the impetus to create not just one category, but multiple categories. Like if I look at, from CrowdStrike's lens, right, we pioneered endpoint detection and response because, the world had shifted with endpoints and how do you actually protect them in the age of the cloud with all the complexity, right? And so there was a new way to protect endpoints, leveraging the power of the cloud, and EDR, came about, right? There's a similar thing happening now with AI because every technological shift creates an expansion of the attack surface, and therefore you need a new way to protect that area of the attack surface, which then creates a new category. So AIDR is an emerging category that is, if you kind of apply the same principles to EDR, you can apply them to AIDR. That's just one example. There's other categories that will and are already being formed around, using AI as the impetus to it, whether it's being called agentic, whatever, AI, whatever, insert word, right? But like, Gartner is an example. They had previously, tracked the SIM market, right? And there's a SIM MQ. This year, they're actually splitting and they're creating probably, I don't know, I don't think this is private information, but for those of you that follow the market, there's still going to be a SIM MQ, but they're actually creating another MQ spawned off of the SIM market called an integrated SOC MQ. Now, you could actually, I would argue that you could replace integrated with agentic because it's a lot of the same criteria. And it's really a lot of the AI criteria and requirements are kind of driving that integrated SOC, right? And so I look at that as, I'm just going to call it an agentic SOC MQ for the sake of that. Like we talk about at CrowdStrike driving transformation through an agentic SOC to stay ahead of the adversaries. There's other, companies out there that talk about it too. So I think that's an example of, another example of AI actually transforming an existing market category into something different. But it's taking the basis of a SIM and actually creating a new market category using that as the foundation.
So this is a big conflict I have in mind. I'm curious what you think about this. Do you think the future is very much human-centered products where the humans are using the products, or whether the agents are actually doing the work and then the customers are essentially buying outcomes? Because historically all these products are built with dashboards and alerts and so the human gets engaged and he does the work. But the future looks like, at least from my vantage point, the future looks like the agent just does the work, and it just delivers the outcomes for you, like whatever the outcome could be. So whether it is agentic SOC, AI SOC, whatever it is, do you have a point of view on what that is? Where the market is going to pull you from? Is it more to just deliver the outcome regardless of how the work gets done? Because recently, when I think Salesforce came out and said, hey, we are a headless CRM or something, the entire is becoming headless. There is no UI. Uh, wow, that's a big claim to make. I'm curious, what do you think?
Look, I don't think, I think agentic still needs a human in the loop. And I think whether
Is
it's
this a
security,
short-term thing or even long-term, you think
I think
human?
even long term. Look, I think, for at least the foreseeable future, I can't predict 30, 20, 30 years in the future, but, you still need, humans for, you know, novel, like in the case of security, they're finding, novel threats. Like you still need humans for that. You can agentify an entire workflow. And look, over time, maybe will it get there? Maybe, but the humans you still require human decision making. You still require human judgment. Those are things that, at least I don't think for the foreseeable future, an agent will be able to replicate. In the world of marketing, I mean, you know, like I look at certain areas of marketing and like, I can see a world in the not so distant future where you can agentify a large part of an entire work, if not the entire workflow. But like, I think you still need a human in the loop at varying points to validate and provide judgment. And you need someone who understands to know whether it's good or bad output. I think you still need that. And I think there's other areas in like creativity. I don't, with his, like at some point AI is going to be really good and can create great, amazing, creates creative graphics and treatments and all of that. But I can at least speak for our creative team at CrowdStrike. Like there's no agent that's going to replace the wonderful work that my team does anytime soon. So, you can apply that, I'm sure to any, any function, including security.
Last topic, JJ. What's the role of marketing in the age of AI? How is that role changing? I mean, my first question actually on that is: are you Claude filled yet? Are you are you are you are you Claude filled yet? So
Yeah.
how is the marketing changing in the age of AI?
Yeah. I mean, so I think we went from, every function, was, using a chat. Well, today now every person in marketing uses some form of a chatbot. And I think now it's like we've got multiple chatbots that are different for different and, different things. Different models are good for different, I'd say individual tasks. That's kind of where it started, right? Like I want to write a white paper. I'm going to, get a great first draft using AI. That's like basic at this point, right? But we've got that, every single team uses it to like automate tasks for productivity. I think now, and I'm excited about, Claude Code, but also Claude Cowork is how do you actually orchestrate? I think that's the next, wave of orchestrating you know, cross marketing and even cross functional workflows end to end. Like we're looking at our entire campaign process from ideation all the way through execution and measurement and everything in between, writing the briefs, creating the content, writing coming up with the ideation for the ads, like everything in between, all the approvals, all the workflows, like all of that is kind of where the next phase is. We also have this really cool dashboard for every product line that we have a real-time listening engine where it actually goes out and it feeds back in real-time sentiment about, what it's seeing with us, what it's seeing with our competitors, where we need to lean into certain topics and where we may need to bid higher on keywords. And it actually has an agent that will like automatically generate a first draft of content. Like you should go do thought leadership on this topic. Let me generate it for you. It's pretty cool. Like we're doing some really cool things. Now I'll say like I was just actually talking to someone about this last week. You know, it's not just the tech, it's the change management. So I think every marketing team should have people in their team that can help build the technology, maybe forward deployed marketing engineers in marketing, and then also someone who can help drive the change management because it is so much of you have to reimagine how you work and reinvent your process. And where do humans play? Where do the agents play? And what skills do you need as a human? Like this is transformation at its most fundamental level.
Are you creating more content, more targeted ads using AI compared to what you were maybe a year or 2 years ago? Or is it essentially the same, but the quality is better?
I think it's probably it's probably the latter. Like I don't think that like I don't want content for the sake of content, and I certainly don't want AI slop. I think
Mm.
it's how do you accelerate the process of creating content, and how do you use AI as a thought partner to make sure that you're super tight on the messaging according to the persona. You can make it super personalized. So I think the 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 real value is not just in the speed, but it's in the quality of the output, not producing more.
No, but is it much more targeted now?
Yes.
Because it's much more
Yes.
targeted because you have so much data to infer on so
Yes.
that you can appeal to the right audience at the right time. Especially
Yes.
this dashboard idea seems super cool. Are you then also hiring more people? Do you think there is more need for marketers, or is that going to stay stable with augmented with AI tools?
I think there's certain roles where, and until an agent can plan an event, I'm saying that in jest. Like there's certain roles where you still need people. And I think you still need people in roles that can be largely agentified for the reasons we just talked about. I think the role of the human in those and the role of the people will evolve, and the skill sets required will evolve. How do you, how do you manage AI and manage agents and be able to manage an AI native process and workflow might be a skill in the future here, that not too distant future, that might be more, in need and in demand than maybe some of the more traditional skills. So I think it's just going to change what, how we work, but also change like what the skills are that are required to do our jobs.
All right. JJ, last question for the day. What's the next big category that you're creating?
Yeah.
um,
Creating a category not for work. Let's just say
oh,
that. Yes.
oh, that's
Yes. I'm not so TBD. I have a hobby. I have a hobby around interior design. You can see from my background behind me. So I'm working on something in my spare time that's going to help me, harness my hobby. So not
it's
work related.
funny. It's funny that you have spare time. I didn't
I
think you
don't
had
have
any.
any spare time. I'm glad
That's
as I say that. There is no spare time. But AI is helping me do it. How about that? I wouldn't be able to move as fast if I didn't have AI.
JJ, this has been an epic interview. Thank you for coming on Noise to Signal. I really wanted to have this discussion with you because this entire series, Noise to Signal, would have been incomplete because I talk about AI, cyber, and vulnerability management a lot on this channel, and then I felt like this would be incomplete without the exposure management discussion in the mix. So I'm grateful for you to coming on the show, and I hope you finish your new category and then we come back on the show and we talk about that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It was really really, really enjoyed it.